All right, looks like we're live, and I'm here with Jordan Owen. Jordan, say hello.
Hello. It says off air on my end.
I think we're live. Says we're live. Yeah, we're live.
Okay.
At least it should be. Um, says live on my end.
There it is. Okay, it's live on my
All
end.
right, all right, cool.
All right.
All righty, um, so I want to have Jordan on today. Just kind of in the past few months, we've seen a lot of Ecelab kind of meltdowns and implosions and stuff. We've seen Channel Awesome implode even further than they already had into some sort of a neutron star. Spoonie continues to melt down. You saw the internet blood sports rise and then sort of fall. Segments of it definitely like Baked Alaska. Just a lot of Ecelab kind of implosions and meltdowns and breakdowns and whatnot. So I just thought it would be interesting to talk to somebody who kind of just walked away from uh, the entire Ecelab thing. Um, so yeah, Jordan, why don't you tell us, kind of why you stepped back from YouTube and what you've been up to and that sort of thing?
Sure. I mean, for me, honestly, it came down to it came to a point where I realized I could be a shit kicker on the internet, or I could do what I really want to do with my life, which is write stories and play the guitar and all that. And if I wanted to do either one of those things with any degree of professionalism, I needed to kind of take a step back from this YouTube thing that was becoming nothing but detrimental to my existence. And I had hit had very much hit a wall. I think as far as going as far as I could with the format that I was on, and so it's the meltdown, as you put it. We see a lot of this stuff, and the thing is, and I include myself in this, but there's no sanity test for becoming an e-celeb. I mean, you're going to, you're still you, and you have to, at the end of the day, and you have to remember that, and remember that, you can't take the YouTube thing with you into your own personal life. And so for me, it was just a recognition of the fact that I was entirely too thin-skinned to keep doing what I was doing, and trying to use kind of, I built up this brand for myself on making controversial statements, and it started out as just like, well, this guy will say what he thinks and tell you what he thinks no matter what. And it evolved from that, I think, into kind of a place of like, can't wait to hear what insane thing he says next, and it stops being about the content and starts being about the outrage. And and I won't lie to you. I mean, the weight of the misconceptions, the willful misrepresentations weighed on me after a while. I don't mind criticism. I welcome constructive criticism, genuine constructive criticism. But when you're going as far as like, I give you an example. I made a video one time where I said that if Anita Sarkeesian really wanted to take care, or really wanted to deal with the death threats and everything at her speaking event, she should start carrying a sidearm. And somebody took that and reposted it with the title, "Jordan Owen is a monster, here's the proof." And it's like, look, dude, I'm pro Second Amendment. I see that as a perfectly viable option if you want to open carry. That's not monstrous. That's not insane. That's not anything like that. But YouTube has contributed heavily, and I readily admit that my own invective has contributed to this as well. Contributed to this culture where there's no longer any polite disagreement. You're either Gandhi or Hitler, and there's no gap in between. And so it's just trying to live in that, and trying to be a part of that is just impossible. I realized that, because after I finished my documentary, my cat says hi. I realized after I finished my documentary that whatever I did, whatever project I undertook, people were going to try to fuck with it because just out of the same mindset that I had fallen into, that we're all Gandhi and this is Hitler and we have to dogpile this person and kind of kind of ruin whatever opportunity they're doing. So when it came time for me to announce a project that was completely apolitical, I was dogpiled on by people who tried to interfere with it. And that's why, for example, I'm working on a project right now, actually, that I'm funding entirely by myself, which is part of why it's taking so long. And it's actually nearing completion. But it's working on it entirely by myself, and there are people. I'm not even saying what it is. I've alluded to it a little bit in my videos, but there are some fairly major people involved in this one as well, and so this whole thing. My whole thing is I'm not even going to announce it, and I'm not doing any crowdfunding for it. There can be no no interference until the product is out there and ready to go. So that's been the main thing, is just realizing that this very, I hate to use this word, but this very toxic culture that we live in. I've just got to I just had, if I wanted to do what I really want to do, I have to take a step back from that. And I've thought about getting back into some commentary and kind of toed those waters, but I want to do it in a very different way, where I'm not. It's not based on this ongoing thing of like, who's the flavor of the month YouTube star, and how do I tell them to fuck off, and rather just making it purely about the content. So that's where I'm at. Yeah.
I've also noticed there's a lot of, because the best thing and worst thing about YouTube is anyone can do it.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, even if they get big, they lack a certain, I guess, professionalism. Mm-hmm. Like, I always like to compare Angry Video Game Nerd to other people, because that's a guy that's extremely professional.
Yeah.
He's never bitches out his fans. He keeps his personal life, separate. I mean, I followed the guy for years before I found out he had a kid and was even married.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he keeps all that stuff separate. He doesn't go on social media and spurg. Like, he doesn't have a Twitter. Cinemassacre has a Twitter.
Yeah.
He has a Twitter for the company. He doesn't go out there and spurg. So there's a certain professionalism to him. And then you compare that to, I mean, take your pick, Spoonie, for example, just as an entertainer that's completely independent on himself.
Mm-hmm.
Certain lack of professionalism, and you see this in a lot of areas, and social media is, I suspect in the next 10 years, a lot of companies are going to have pretty strict social media policies, assuming you don't have just an anonymous account.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, the thing is, we've created a different social dynamic with the internet, and basically that social dynamic comes down to we can now say whatever the hell we want without worrying about getting punched. There's no things that would normally be the start of a fight in real life where we would never go because we know that's where it's going. That is now entirely possible, and it's possible to do it anonymously. And so what happens there from that is you're just going to create an extraordinary amount of ill will, because, even if if somebody wants to confront me about something I've said in real life, they're obviously they're going to usually begin with like, hey man, and come at it a little bit more mildly. Whereas with the internet, when you don't have to consider the real life human in front of you, there's now suddenly this almost automatic undertaking of just the most hateful or the most intense thing you can say, because you no longer have to think about the immediate consequences. So that's the new social paradigm that we're in. That we're in a world where there's no brain to mouth filter as far as the internet is concerned. And that's what I think a lot of, when we talk about so-called, cyber harassment and cyberbullying and all that. I mean, don't get me wrong. There is a very real quantifiable concept of that when you are, using the internet to actually invade people's real lives. But as far as the more surface level, just hateful statements that go back and forth on the internet and everything, uh, that's what that is. And so it's a tremendous. You talk about, yeah. I mean, I know there are companies now that say, well, hand over the access codes to your social media accounts so we can go take a look and that kind of thing. And I think that's extraordinarily unfair, by the way. But because I mean, it's like, how far back are you going to go? Because we went back to when I was in college. Oh God. But the but yeah, I mean, that's ultimately where it's at, man. We're in a world where nobody gets punched for being an asshole anymore. There's no direct, immediate physical consequences or the potential thereof. So people are gonna go batshit, do whatever they want, and that's the new social paradigm that we're in, and that's gonna wear on you.
I think part of it, you're going to see companies probably doing, let's see your social media, because they want to make sure, some HR cat lady wants to make sure you're not, not making a thought crime. But then
Yeah.
there's going to be some of it, I mean, I'm a comic book fan, and I think of all these left wing comic book writers who they're on Twitter calling everyone to the right of Bill Clinton a Nazi.
Hmm.
And, you're kind of representing this company you work for in that moment. So
Hmm.
I think they have Marvel or DCU, wherever they work for, has a legitimate claim to say, hey, knock that shit off.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
so there's going to end up being some balance struck with that, where,
Hmm.
especially for more public figures, where,
Yeah.
I mean, back in the golden age of Hollywood, and they didn't even have the social media problems they did. There were people that worked for the studios that used to make sure, every actor kept whatever degenerate shit they were up to in the closet,
Hmm.
and said, just behave when you're out in public. That's all we
Yeah.
ask. Just don't act a fool in public.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, well, it's funny. I say this had, Harlan Ellison just died 2 days ago, but I think about Harlan Ellison's novel Spider Kiss, which is about a rock star in the 50s, kind of Jerry Lee Lewis, Elvis type rock star, and it's not really about him. It's about his fixers. It's about the people around him that keep him out of trouble and everything. And the ultimately, they gets to a point in the book. It ultimately gets to a point where they decide they can't they can't put up with him anymore, and this monster they've created this monster, and the only way is to destroy him. So what they do is they secretly film a sex tape of him having sex with multiple women at the same time and start circulating it. And in the 1950s, that ruins his reputation instantly. He's done. Nowadays, that would be that there's people that launch their careers with sex tapes, you know, and so it is, yeah, you're right, it's a very different paradigm, and it's weird that we've used we've used kind of circling the drain, bottom end behavior. It's just a very, very profound inversion, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other thing, everybody runs their mouth and,
Yeah.
talks about, oh, Civil War tomorrow. And then the moment, a good example is, so many leftists in the media have been calling for, do we need to have blood in the streets? And then some people at a newspaper got shot over what turned out to be from what I can see so far, a personal vendetta the guy had. And instantly they're like, oh, this violent rhetoric. And it's like, you were running your mouth about this, just the other day.
Yeah. Well, it's right. It's a nobody has the guts to step back and say, look, everybody on the other side gets the same considerations and the same leniencies that I do. And so that's the thing. I did a video, one of the very, very few videos I've done about feminist frequency in the last few years was one about how people who worked for feminist frequency were going out when when there were the riots at UC Berkeley that put people in the emergency room and destroyed property, and there were bonfires, and people assaulted on on camera and women assaulted on camera, that kind of thing. All of this like just apocalyptic rage at the idea of this guy coming to speak. The feminist people who work for Feminist Frequency were on Twitter uh, applauding that and applauding all of the violence and all of this, and I made a video about how that's very revealing that they're not interested in nonviolence. They're totally interested in violence. They just want to set up this social dynamic where uh, they get all of the protections of compassion and kindness and nonviolence, but the other side is the de facto enemy and gets to be treated that way. It's kind of like another example of that was with Richard Spencer getting punched during that interview, which again, I don't like Richard Spencer. I don't agree with Richard Spencer, but I think he has a right to stand there and express his point of view without getting punched. And people can't understand that now. They can't. All they see is either you're on the side of the good guys and you get all the protections of freedom, or you're on the side of the bad guys and you don't get the protections of freedom. And they don't understand that if that's your mentality, you don't have freedom anymore. And
it's especially foolish from the left because while they do control a lot of the establishment, right wingers tend to have more guns.
Yeah.
Well, so there's that old joke of what the next civil war happens, and the red states bring guns and the blue states bring bongs and dildos.
Yeah.
How long is that gonna last?
Bongs and dildos. Now that was a good band. But yeah, I mean you're right. Well, it's the thing of I was watching. I think it was Bill Maher. Some people they brought up the whole punch a Nazi thing, and this one left leaning guy was like, well, we have if you think about what the Nazis represent, we have every right to punch a Nazi, blah blah blah, and people were trying to justify it on the internet with these things about like, well, because of what Richard Spencer represents, if he wins, violence will happen, or if he wins the argument, violence will be the end result if he influences policy. Therefore, we have the right to respond with violence. And I'm like, that is the level of historical illiteracy that just pisses me off. It just burns me to no end, because it's like, dude, yes, the history of Nazi violence is totally horrendous and bloodthirsty. And so is the history of violence from the Marxist, communist far left.
Well, that's the thing. They think they can play this game and it doesn't escalate.
Right.
Because the sequel to Punch a Nazi is Stab a Communist That Tried to Punch Me.
Yeah, exactly. And they don't understand. They have no idea of mutually assured destruction.
I mean, you want to get violent, then I'm not going to say there's not times that's not called for, but
yeah,
you have to be willing to accept. Okay, you've just crossed a line, and you don't just step back the moment it gets hot.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the it was a phenomenon I observed when I was a kid in like middle school. I remember confronting a bully who was of the mindset like he would punch you, and then when you turned around and punched him back, he literally genuinely believed you had started a fight. And he could, and it was the most bizarre thing. But you're talking about someone who was either so narcissistic or sociopathic, or just had such a grandiose opinion of himself. So very much a silver spoon in the mouth kind of kid, But he literally thought you were starting a fight with him. That he literally had the right to punch you, but you had no right to punch him back. And that's what's happened now on a grand scale. And while my politics skew towards kind of a left libertarian perspective, I consider myself socially liberal and would like to see more responsible economic policy. Even though I skew that way, my eternal frustration with the left is they've now granted themselves this bizarre position of we can punch whoever we want, as hard as we want, as often as we want, and never face a single consequence as a result. And that's like that. But not only that, if we do face a single consequence, we are now being persecuted. And again, that was the thing with the people that work for Feminist Frequency, which feminist frequency is now doing so bad financially that I would imagine most of those people are more just not working, but kind of contributing out of the quote unquote goodness of their hearts. But at the time, the people who worked for that organization, they want, they wrap themselves in nonviolence and this pacifist, hippy dippy love your neighbor thing, but they celebrate violence when it happens to the other side. I don't, if I, it, I'm not going to lie. I will. There are times when I celebrate violence happening to people when I hear about it, but I am never so naive as to think that, the other side is somehow going to understand and capitulate when violence happens to them. It's that they're somehow going to bow their heads in shame and walk away. That's just unbelievably naive.
Well, I mean, a lot of these, I hate to sound like older than I am, but a lot of these millennials with their, participation trophies and all, they don't understand what it is to lose.
Yeah.
They don't understand what it is to have stakes.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's a world of, we've been raising so many kids, and I was a part of that too. I don't know how old you are, but I'm going to be 35 in September.
There was a little bit of that crap starting when I was a kid, but
yeah, me too. And I mean, so that, I remember the whole participation trophy. I remember, when we were kids, we'd go to, assembly day, and they'd give us our little awards for the year, and everybody got some kind of award. And they would always give out the awards for attendance, like perfect attendance, which one, that means you definitely came to school sick at some point. And two, I mean, the idea that you're giving kids an award for showing up is what you're supposed to do, and that's the thing. This is actually, I want to do a series of videos on this whole incel phenomenon, because there's a lot of different perspectives to take on that, and a lot of good thought to be had there. And one of the things that occurred to me is the incels are the perfect expression of the participation trophy generation. The guys who think that they ought to just be assigned a wife, by the world, and that kind of thing. And even at that point, even the most far left leaning commentators like, Jim Jeffries and John Oliver and all those guys are actually finally just saying, fuck you, nobody owes you anything, So it's an absolute participation trophy generation thing. And yeah.
I got a $2 super chat from Cynic in Chief. He says, Antifa punching a Nazi is called friendly fire.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, Antifa, that's one of those things where, honestly, as far as punching goes, because I saw a video where Antifa attacked Sargon of Akkad and Yaron Brook at a speaking engagement at a college, and I'm just like, why? People really ought to just start punching them back. That's the thing. And I'm not, and see, now I say that, and I know someone's going to be like, oh, Jordan Owen made a call for violence. No, I made a call for self-defense. And it's like, if you punch somebody, if you're tough enough to punch somebody, you are tough enough to get punched back. And that's the absolute thing. Well,
one of these guys is going to get themselves shot. It's
Yeah.
that simple. Somebody's not going to be not messing around. I was attacked. I pulled out my gun. I shot him.
Yeah. Exactly. And they're not, and of course they're going to, you say that, or that happens, and what's inevitably going to happen is it's just amazing to me how people, I'll give you an example, how people just pervert the information that they're given to suit their agenda. I saw, or their personal beliefs and everything. I was reading a Time magazine. I think it was either Time or Newsweek. This is years ago. I can't remember any of the names or the details or anything, but I remember this article. And there's an article about a little boy who was, I think, age 10 to 11 when all this had happened. And he came out of the closet as gay very early. And he came out of the closet as trans very early. And he would he would dress in drag going to school and everything and all that. And, again, understand, as kind of unnecessary as I think that is, I don't think anyone should be bullied for that or mistreated for that uh, necessarily. But what happened was this kid, he had a crush on a little boy, another little boy in his class, and he was hitting on this boy. And I kept waiting for the part where, I kept waiting to get to the part in the article where this kid was bullied for, having a crush on this little boy or something like that. And, but he never was. He was never mistreated. Consistently, it was, this boy just wants to be left alone. Stop, stop bothering me. Stop coming at me with this. Just leave me alone. And this kid kept coming after him. Like, he wore, they said something about like this kid would wear high heels to school every day. And, they would hear like this other boy would get to class and they'd, or get to the playground or whatever. And they'd hear him, this other kid calling his name and running towards him with the heels clacking on the ground and everything. And that boy that was the target of his affections was just ridiculed horribly for that. Very few people at this point, a certain tide had turned, and so very few people said anything or mistreated the boy that was gay or trans or however it was defined. But this other boy, they were just making fun of him constantly, mercilessly ridiculing him, and eventually, that boy was so felt so bullied and so mistreated that he brought a gun to school and shot the other the kid that was hitting on him, shot him to death, and and then after he shot him, he put the gun down on his desk and put his head down on the desk and just sat like that until the authorities came and took him away. And the thing was, so that kid that he shot died, obviously. And I was waiting for like you're reading the article and there's just the summary of actions that occurred or events that occurred. And then I'm waiting for the angle. I'm like, how does this tie together? Are we going to acknowledge that, this was a form of sexual harassment. This was a form of bullying that needs to be addressed. And now with the newfound acceptance of homosexuality, we need to be conscious of things like this and self-regulating within that community. And no, at the end of the article, it said, today, little so-and-so is regarded as a hero by the LGBT community. And I'm thinking, the boy that harassed another student in his class horribly, day in, day out, sexual harassment, to the point that he got shot to death, is somehow a hero. I mean, that's the problem. Everything skews automatically in favor of their predetermined side to such an insane degree that people will take I think very obvious situation of bullying and harassment and spin it to be like it's somehow something good for them. And that's the world we live in. I mean, there's zero objectivity. People are always surprised when, for example, to use an example, like despite my pro-gun ownership position, my pro-Second Amendment position, I'm on the side of Trayvon Martin and the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmer. I don't want to get off on a discussion on that, but I'm on the side of Trayvon Martin and against George Zimmerman. I think Trayvon was on the right and George Zimmerman was on the wrong, and people are amazed by that. And it's like, yeah, because above all, I want to look at everything objectively. I want to get at the truth, and a lot of people are scared of the truth, and and that's the thing. But I want to, wherever possible, to try to get at the truth and try to get at the reality, and that's the only way we move forward. That's where I do agree with Ayn Rand. The only thing that is moral is that which is true, and we have to get at the truth. And a lot of people don't want that. They don't want to confront. They want to obfuscate and prevaricate and redefine everything as somehow being in their favor, and that's the problem, man. That's where we're at.
Well, yeah, that kid. I mean, being part of a protected class. If that was a straight little boy that was hitting on a little girl he thought was cute relentlessly, that kid would have been probably expelled before it ever reached that point.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, I've seen the and I mean I've seen the other extreme of that too. When I was a kid, again, I mean when I was a kid, I used to live in Mississippi, and I can remember when the only openly gay kid in my whole school had to be escorted from class to class by teachers so he wouldn't be harassed or mistreated. And with the girls, I can remember when I was that was an environment where at that school boys were more or less allowed to punch girls with virtually no repercussions, and it was a very savage environment. A lot of that, I don't want to get off on a rant, but a lot of that came from there being a very specific church that was preaching about how men have dominion over women and the extreme and everything in that local community. But I've seen the extreme of that, but it swings back and forth. It's just, what did Jim Goad say that, the focus of the prudery changes, but the level of prudery remains constant. So now, yeah, in this society that we live in now, it would be, you're absolutely right. I mean, especially at the elementary level, in any regard, because you're so dealing with crowd control at that point. Yeah, if a boy was harassing a little girl that way, he would, probably be expelled or put in another class or something like that, or disciplined before it ever got to that point. And more than likely, if she shot him, she would be understood to be if not celebrated, at least understood to be the victim at that point. So
Yeah.
yeah, and yeah, I mean it's kind of like if you read J. Neil Schulman's book Rainbow Cadenza, which I don't want to misrepresent it too much because I've not read it myself, but I know about it and what some of the arguments he makes. It's about a future world that's where political correctness has gone in the extreme, and you now have what are known as the touchable class instead of the untouchables. These are the touchables, and it's the people who are so automatically afoul of political correctness that you can, the gloves are off and you can do whatever you want to them. So, and it's a very good point. We're going to get to a point where, you have your protected groups who get all of the benefits and all the protections and rights and privileges of freedom, and then you have your touchable class, and it's just going to be the purge for them. So.
Something else I wanted to talk to you about, because I know you're obviously a libertarian. I was wondering what your thoughts are on a lot of the very political censorship that goes on on the internet. I think Milo got thrown off PayPal recently. Obviously Facebook and Twitter and all the and Google, YouTube. They come down on you for arbitrary reasons, but also if you're ever so slightly right of center on anything, they'll come down on you. Yeah. And I hear a lot of people say, well, it's the free market and it's freedom of association, which I don't think is entirely accurate, because we really don't have that in this country anymore. I would argue we haven't since the Civil Rights Act. But there's something that there was a court case, and I can't remember the exact court case, but there was a court case where there was a company town right around the turn of the last century, and they tried to stop some old lady from handing out like religious pamphlets on the sidewalk, and the courts ruled that they couldn't do that because they had a monopoly on the means in which speech could take place. Mm-hmm. So the sidewalks had to be treated at least somewhat like public sidewalks. Right. And I'm kind of reaching a point where I think that needs to be applied more to the internet. I mean, the thought of somebody getting thrown off PayPal, because they offended a feminist or they said nigger or something like that is just ridiculous. I mean, imagine if your bank account said, "Oh, you made a gay joke last week. We're taking away your checking account." Yeah, like that's nightmarish. And you could argue, well, it's freedom of association, but we don't really have that right now, and we certainly don't have it across the board. Yeah, well, it's the thing, and it's funny. I was arguing with someone about this the other day that we do need, on a certain level, we do need to have freedom of association, in the sense that, for example, like the perfect example is the legal brothel system in Las Vegas, in Nevada, in Reno, Nevada. Really, like if you go to the Moonlight Bunny Ranch, there is a sign on the door
and I've never been there, by the way. I'm just talking about pictures I've seen anywhere, or HBO and all of that. But if you go to the Moonlight Bunny Ranch, there is a sign on the door that says, "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." And most places will, we don't realize that most places, are all places do have that right to refuse service. They just don't advertise it. But they advertise it very clearly on the front of that building. And why is it? Why do they have the right of association? Why do they have the right to turn anybody away for any reason at any time? Because if they don't, if a girl, one of the women that works at that brothel decides she doesn't want to have sex with a man and she has to do it anyway, then it becomes rape. And that's the thing. For that reason, because the alternative, it's either free association or sanctioning rape. It's because of that, it's either you have to have freedom of association, because that's the choice. That's the point that you're at. Because there is a point at which bodily autonomy trumps anything, trumps any other considerations. And so there is a very important freedom of association thing. However, what you're talking about, I don't remember if this is the same Supreme Court case or not, but there was a case that determined that if what you are providing is a medium by which people are intended to exercise their constitutional right to free speech, then in accordance with your stated objectives, truth in advertising, as a business entity, you are required to uphold that right to freedom of speech. So the difference being, like, you walk into your local barber shop and say something that during the big brouhaha at the local barber shop, you say something that pisses everybody off. The barber can tell you to get lost, because the barber shop is not a forum for your free speech. It happens, the speech that happens there happens entirely at the discretion of the owner. But in the case of YouTube, in the case of things like this, where the medium, the purpose of the medium, the avenue of the medium is the free and open exchange of ideas, then the only time you should be legally allowed to censor somebody is when their words actually do carry with it the implication, or the direct and intentional implication, of a violation of someone's larger rights. So obviously you don't have the right to threaten to kill somebody and that kind of thing. But as far as what you talk about, your beliefs, that kind of thing, that's constitutionally protected. And, constitutional scholars have successfully argued before the courts that has to be protected regardless.
I think there's also something where a company becomes a monopoly, and not necessarily through bad practices, but just perhaps a natural monopoly. The world doesn't really need two YouTubes. As much as there are alternatives, and that's great and all. The problem with YouTube alternatives is nobody uses them. I have my animated videos on BitChute, and that's all well and good, but nobody's on BitChute. So what good does it do anybody?
Right.
There are times when you just sort of have a natural monopoly, and I don't like the idea of breaking up monopolies, because it feels like you're punishing a winner, and that's rather un-American. Mm-hmm. But when you are at the top of the hill, maybe there's a certain level of responsibility that comes with that.
Yeah.
Again, just treat it. I would treat it like utilities almost. I mean, your power company, as long as you're paying the bill, they can't shut off your service.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. And that's the thing. It's and it's your power. The other thing is your power company is not talk about freedom of association. Your power company is not associated with you. There is a huge separation there. The power company is being paid to provide electricity to the building. They're not providing that electricity to your building in no way suggesting an endorsement of your beliefs.
Well, I mean, you look at PayPal. I mean, you could make the same argument. PayPal isn't associated with me, and yet they'll shut down accounts of people. And I would argue it's theft. I mean, if you got, I don't know, $500 in your PayPal and they shut it down, and that $500 is gone, like they didn't send it to your bank account or something, that's theft. I mean, they just stole your $500.
Well, that was what, if you remember when we made Sarkeesian Effect, that was right at the beginning. There was that huge controversy with Patreon, and, I actually ended up talking to Jack Conte on the phone about it. But there was that huge controversy about them blocking our money and, not being, wondering if they could, or trying to decide whether or not they wanted to shut it down. And the thing was, ultimately, I mean, they did the right thing, and this, I never had to bring this up as an argument. They did the right thing and just let it go forward. But the thing that really, above and beyond any kind of perceived sympathy to different ideologies or whatever, what ultimately motivated them, I think, was the simple reality, and I had looked at the law at this point, the simple reality that if somebody is trying to, if you are offering a medium by which somebody is transferring money to somebody else, you cannot legally block that transfer. And that's the thing. Unless it's being used to facilitate committing a crime, and even then, it's contingent on there being proof of a crime. But you can't stop that transfer of money. You cannot do that. And so that's ultimately what it was. It was like, when they were thinking about blocking us, it's like, sorry, the funding had already gone through. You can't stop it from coming to us at that point. Or I'm sorry, the digital transfer of money had already begun, and you can't get in the way of that. So that's the thing. They're going to start the main thing. What it mainly comes down to is as weird as it is. A lot of these social justice minded companies, or at least the ones that project that, I don't know how much they practice it in reality, but the ones that project that have become these monolithic monopolies whose lobbying power trumps that of the dissident, more libertarian voices like myself. And it's very ironic that way, I think. But it's kind of like why does the Southern all the Southern Poverty Law Center does now is defame people. Why do they still exist? Because they have a $250 million war chest, and their opposition, none of their opposition, if every person they've defamed pooled all of their collective net worth, it would not equal a tenth of that probably. So that's why the Southern Poverty Law Center continues to exist. And that's that's extremely unfortunate, but that's the situation we're in. So.
Right now, the only guy I see in power that's doing anything about this kind of online censorship problem seems to be Ted Cruz. He was really grilling Zuckerberg when Zuckerberg was in front of the Senate for whatever reason, and a lot of obviously the Democrats aren't going to touch it because they like the direction it's going in. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the Republicans, they just, like I said, they'll say all this crap about, I just would prefer a free market solution and all this other stuff, but it's just cowardice. They don't want to fight it. They don't care, or they just don't want to pick the fight or whatever. Because it's not like we're talking about Ron Paul's here, where they're pure free market absolutists. None of them are. Just all of a sudden, this is a principle they want to get on because they don't want to have to fight for something.
Right. Well, anyone that's actually claiming they want a free market solution, what they do is they meet with economists. They should meet with economists and say, how can we best solve this problem by getting out of the way of the market? And those answers are out there. I'm not an economist, but I'm subscribed to plenty of people just on YouTube that offer commentary on things like that. So the solutions are out there. You're right. It's just it's just a way of it's kind of like they're on South Park when they're making fun of people who the controversy around the Confederate flag, where they're the newscasters interviewing street people, and every person they interview on the street is just saying, oh well, it's racist, but I respect the heritage too, and they walk off, and it's just that's the same response from all of them, and it's like none of them want to actually take a hard stance on anything. You're right, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I prefer a free market solution. Well, yeah, I guess I would too, but I more than that, I'd prefer a solution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
for real.
And you're not going to be elected to dog catcher if this keeps up in 10 years,
Right. I mean, it's getting ridiculous, and I mean, part of that is just because we now live in a world where party loyalty trumps how ironic that word keeps coming back up, but party loyalty trumps working to find actual solutions, and we no longer live in that world. It's like they keep saying when the impeachment stuff comes up about Trump, the framers of the Constitution never conceived of a world where in their structuring of government, never conceived of a world where people would put party over country. That was the big error. They didn't put in the factor for human corruption.
Well, I think the biggest problem in the Republican Party is that it never has represented its base. And I know its base is fractured. There's, social conservatives, there's libertarians, but it doesn't represent any significant aspect of its base.
No.
There was an article in, I think, The Sun I read where, and I was surprised because it's kind of mainstream and it was almost a little edgy for them to say this, but they even asked, they go, how did the party of mostly white Christians end up run by primarily atheistic Jews?
Right.
It's almost like there's some sort of disconnect between, and there's no libertarian interest. There's no even social conservative interest in the Republican Party at the top. The majority of Republican politicians don't give a shit about their base.
Yeah.
And actively work against them.
Yeah. Well, it's just both parties. Every 4 years, the Republicans show up and say, "Praise Jesus, give me the and we need the evangelical vote and all of that. Praise Jesus in the abortions, and the evangelicals come out and vote for it." And every 4 years, the Democrats come out and say, all hail the black populace, and here's new social programs, and they come out and vote for that. And then neither side gives a fuck about those people, in the interim 4 years between, or the 3 years between each election cycle. And I mean, and that's borne out in, as many people have pointed out, now the evangelical Christian voters are in this weird place where they condemned Bill Clinton, but are now defending the guy who was out raw dogging porn stars, so neither one of these parties actually represents the values or interests of their base. So.
Well, I remember in 2006 when the Democrats absolutely swept both the House and the Senate on specifically an anti-war mandate. That was incredibly what it was. And they just promptly were like, yeah, but, the president's the commander-in-chief. There's nothing we can do about it. And I'm like, well, you ran on doing something about it. And also the House has the purse string. So the House can put the brakes on literally anything the federal government's doing.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's just some people with the way Democrats act, where they push so hard, and they kind of, it's like every time they get control of things, it feels like a miracle has been passed. But they get in there, and some people will say, oh, well, it's just political theater, and it's all one party, the duopoly and all that. But really what I think it is like, Democrats have got to fucking get over being egalitarian Boy Scouts. You've got to, they get, every time they get into power, they're like, we're going to, we've been getting butt fucked for the last, 2, 3, 4 years, but now we're going to forge across party lines and that kind of thing. And it's like, no, man, no, you've got a clean house. And the Republicans don't mind doing that. They don't mind taking the reins and telling the other side to fuck off. The Democrats are afraid to do that. We as a people have got to come together, left and right. We've got to come together as a people and be purple, but not red or blue, but purple. But as far as, effective political strategy in Washington, you just can't go on with this naive belief that you're somehow going to be able to work with these people. It's got to. I mean, again, it's where I start to feel really like the John Galt, Ayn Rand thing, where it's like, God, man, we've just got to let the bottom drop out of this whole system and start over.
All right. Well, I think we've gone on for a little while here.
Sure.
Any kind of closing thoughts?
Uh, I mean, we got kind of far afield of the specific question, which was celeb drama, and I guess the main closing thing, and I want to do some video commentary about this on my own channel, but the main thing that I can say is that stepping back from all of that it's really given me the opportunity to kind of honestly look at myself and kind of reevaluate my priorities and my interests and everything, and I've done it's funny. I've done such a tremendous amount of personal growth that I honestly don't recognize in a lot of ways the person I was a few years ago when I was really, really in the heat of all of this stuff. And it's weird. I want to talk. I want to do, like I said, videos about this on my channel, but I lost a tremendous amount of weight. I've been working out, and then I've been working out. Exercising and everything. And then for the last 6 months, starting in January of this year, I have been doing CrossFit and hitting it hard. And it's completely changed, completely revitalized my outlook, my vibe, and everything. So much so that I've actually been able to dial down my antidepressants. Like I'm taking less medication than I ever have in the last 15 years. And so that that being where I'm at, it's a very positive thing because I feel like I can come back to YouTube in a more proactive way where I'm more focused on doing good content and expressing and promoting good, useful, beneficial ideas rather than just aspiring to be a shock jock. And honestly, in our world of unending and unyielding self promotion, it's very difficult for people like, Channel Awesome, Spoonie, all the people you mentioned to, I think, conceive of doing that. But if more of these instantly famous celeb types took the time to take that, to step away, to step back from that, and really, really evaluate themselves, I think you would get such better content and really incredible, really positive content and that kind of thing. Because now if I make content, I'm not making it from the perspective of someone who's angry and frustrated with the direction his life is going and is using that as a vector for using YouTube as a vector for channeling his own rage and frustration. I'm feeling good and feeling positive, and I'm actually training to run Tough Mudder in October now, and that's where my mind is at, and so my perspective on things is so much better and so much more positive. And that's why I think like things like Jordan Peterson with 12 Rules for Life. I think that's why that's so incredibly positive and why that's catching on. Because I think that's a message that a lot of people need. So anyway, that's my take on it.
All right. Well, Jordan, thanks for being on. I know, this channel's a little bit out your wheelhouse, but I appreciate you stepping in.
Yeah, happy to.
And, probably going to have you on for a debate here in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So that should be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about all we got for right now, folks. I will be going live again at 8 p.m. for the regular Saturday show, so do tune into that. And thanks for listening, everyone. Beckloff out.